Welcome to the Explainer. Now, if you are a focused learner trying to make sense of a massive pile of interview transcripts, focus group notes, or field observations, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're demystifying the dense and, let's be honest, often intimidating academic methodology of qualitative coding. I absolutely love unpacking these kinds of structured processes because once you understand how to harness them, you can turn chaotic, messy human data into brilliant, crystal clear insights. So we're going to guide you through every step of the way, turning the theoretical into the highly practical.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at demystifying qualitative data coding, coding in action with some breakfast data, codes versus overarching themes, emergent versus structured approaches, the many methods of coding, and finally, tools, iteration, and final interpretation.
All right, let's jump into part one, demystifying qualitative data coding.
Pretty much anyone who has ever conducted a qualitative study knows that exhilarating but honestly terrifying moment when you finish your interviews. You're suddenly staring at hundreds of pages of text. It's just a massive, overwhelming volume of data. So how on earth do you begin to summarize what people actually said? Well, that is exactly where coding comes in. According to the classic definition from qualitative researchers Miles and Huberman, codes are tags or labels for assigning units of meaning to chunks of varying size, like words, phrases, or paragraphs. What this really means in plain English is that coding is the process of breaking up very long and detailed qualitative data into common themes. Instead of reading one person's entire interview and then moving to the next, coding lets us pull out specific topics. We assign a label to a chunk of text, and then later on, we can read across all our different sources to compare what everyone had to say on that one particular issue.
To simplify it even further, think of coding as essentially just putting things into categories so it's easier to find them later. It serves as both a method for deep analysis and a highly effective way of just managing your data. Think about it. Once you've gone through and sorted your data into these thematic buckets, writing up your final report becomes exponentially easier. When you need a quote to support a specific finding, you don't have to reread an entire transcript. You literally just look inside that specific category you've created, and your quotes are right there waiting for you.
Moving right along to part two, coding in action, featuring some breakfast data. To really show you how this works in practice, we're going to literally make a slide for coding right now.
Listen to this raw quote from an interview where a participant was asked about what they eat for breakfast. She says, "I'm a single mom with an 8-year-old toddler and breakfast is mayhem, baby has porridge, I microwave up some ready break with whole milk for him." You can see it's a single, run-on sentence, it's raw, it's real, and it contains a ton of layered information. So how do we extract meaning from something like this?
This brilliantly illustrates exactly how the process unfolds. We start by just reading that raw quote. Then, in step 2, we can assign basic descriptive codes. We can literally tag the word porridge with a porridge code, the word milk with a milk code, and the mention of the 8-year-old and toddler with a children code. But we definitely don't have to stop there. In step 3, we can assign deeper, conceptual codes to that exact same sentence. For instance, the fact that she's microwaving breakfast speaks to a broader concept of time or convenience. Mentioning she's a single mom could be tagged under family structure or even social breakdown, depending entirely on the focus of your study. Finally, step 4 shows in vivo coding, where we take the participant's exact, striking word, in this case, mayhem, and make that the code itself. Just look at how one single sentence can be tagged and categorized in a dozen different ways.
Okay, part 3, codes versus overarching themes.
Once you start generating all these tags, you really need to understand the hierarchy of your data. It is absolutely vital to distinguish between a code and a theme, because they are not the same thing. This crucial distinction comes to us from researchers Broad and Clark. Think of a code as a pithy, specific label identifying exactly what is of interest in the data. For example, low-fat yogurt. A theme, on the other hand, is a much broader, recurring pattern or idea clustered around a central concept across your entire dataset. So, healthy eating would be the overarching theme. You would group your specific codes, like low-fat yogurt, counting calories, or eating vegetables, underneath that massive umbrella theme of healthy eating.
Let's move to part 4, emergent versus structured approaches.
Now that we know the mechanics of codes and themes, a natural question pops up. Where do these codes actually come from? Do we make them up before we start, or do we discover them as we go? Well, here are the two opposing ends of the spectrum. On one side, we've got grounded theory, or emergent coding. This is where you sit down with your transcripts in a completely blank sheet of paper. You have zero preconceptions. You read through the data on the fly, and you let the data speak to you, defining codes based purely on what naturally emerges from the text. On the flip side, we have framework analysis, or structured coding. Here, you start with a pre-existing rigid list of topics you're interested in. Your job is to read the data and match what people said to the codes you have already defined. Now, what's really fascinating is that in practice, almost nobody operates strictly at one extreme. Most researchers use a flexible, hybrid combination of both. They might start with a loose framework of ideas they want to explore, but they remain totally open to emergent coding so they can still capture those surprising, unexpected insights that the participants bring up.
Which brings us to part 5, the many methods of coding.
We've seen that you can code descriptively, conceptually, emergently, or structurally. The beautiful and, yeah, sometimes overwhelming truth about qualitative analysis is that there is no single right way to do this. This number always shocks people. 34. In Johnny Saldana's highly regarded textbook on coding qualitative data, he outlines 34 different ways to code. If you are ever feeling stuck or if your current coding approach just isn't yielding interesting insights, this number should give you immense comfort. You can simply go back to the drawing board and try a completely different analytical lens. Let's rapidly walk through just a few of these specific techniques to show you the incredible variety at your fingertips. You could use descriptive coding, which is just literal topics, like tagging the word yogurt. You could use thematic coding, focusing on broader concepts. You could get incredibly granular with line-by-line coding, forcing yourself to assign a code to every single sentence to ensure you aren't just skimming. Then there's IPA, or Interpretive Phenomenological Analysis, which is a really deep dive into how participants experience and make meaning of their world. We also mentioned in vivo coding earlier, where you honor the participant by using their exact, specific vocabulary as the code. And finally, discourse analysis, where you aren't just coding what they say, but how they express themselves, the types of words they use, and their overall tone. You really have an incredible toolkit at your disposal.
And finally, part 6, tools, iteration, and final interpretation.
We've covered a lot of theory, but what does it actually look like when you sit down at your desk? I really cannot stress this concept enough. Coding is nearly always an iterative, cyclical process. You do not just read your data once, code it, and walk away. You read it through multiple times. You might do a fast, descriptive pass first, then a deeper conceptual pass, and eventually, you actually start coding your own coding. You look at the hundreds of codes you've created and start grouping them together, restructuring them, and merging them into those larger umbrella themes we discussed earlier. It is a constant cycle of refinement.
And to manage this whole cycle, you need tools. You've got options ranging from high-tech to highly tactile. There's dedicated qualitative software like Quirkos, which makes organizing visually intuitive and keeps finding quotes just a single click away. But hey, you don't need fancy software. A lot of researchers use Excel spreadsheets for line-by-line coding, or simply use the comments feature in Microsoft Word. Some folks prefer to be totally unplugged, printing out transcripts and attacking them with different colored highlighters. Some even physically cut out sentences with scissors and sort them into different paper envelopes and folders right there on their living room floor. The right tool is simply the one that helps you intimately connect with your data.
But I want to leave you with this final, provocative twist directly from the source material. Do you even need to code at all? After everything we've just discussed, it's crucial to remember that coding itself is not the final analysis. It's really merely a bridge to interpretation. In fact, some practitioners actively dislike coding. They argue that it abstracts you from the nuance of the data, taking rich, complex human stories and reducing them down to clinical labels. If you find the process too reductive, you might actually choose not to formally code at all, and instead simply immerse yourself, reading the data over and over again until the overarching narrative makes sense in your head. Coding is a phenomenal tool to organize and manage qualitative chaos, but ultimately, the deep analysis and the final interpretation, that comes from you. Let that simmer next time you look at a blank transcript.